What we'd like to do is talk a little bit with our good friend, Laura Duran, who is a teacher here in the Hudson Valley. And she has been teaching about this topic for a number of years. She has been an invaluable member of our little committee as we put this thing together, because, you know, one of the things that makes stuff work is understanding your audience. And, you know, Laura's a teacher. She's an educator, you know, just like all of you. And she understands what you're up against. She understands where you're coming from. She's in the classroom, you know, every single day doing this stuff. And she's going to now share some ideas that she has about how you can make this stuff a little more useful and relevant in your classrooms, which we know each and every one of you do every single day. But the idea here is to find out how other folks are doing it and maybe get some new and fresh ideas. So without further ado, I will turn it over to my good friend, Laura.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much. I'm Laura Duran. This is my 14th year teaching. I teach 8th grade ELA right now. I've taught pretty much 8th through 12th grade over my teaching career. And I'm excited to always teach about the Holocaust because, like Dave and Paula, my grandmother, it was a Holocaust survivor. And so I'm just going to share my screen with you all. So when I teach the Holocaust, it is always a build-up to my grandmother's story. And being in 8th grade, normally in a non-COVID world, our kids get to go to Washington, D.C. for the big culminating trip of 8th grade. And so one place that they absolutely stop every year is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And so I really try and really lay heavily for them about the importance of that building and how it's a sacred place. And for some people, it is the only place where they have a physical entity to go and remember loved ones that have passed, even if they haven't met them, but a place where they can go and they can kind of grieve, but still feel a presence, right? And so mine's always a build up to this. My grandmother was a survivor on the SS St. Louis, and that's how I got involved in this committee. Was the Jewish Federation was having a movie night, and they showed the Voyage of the Damned. And my mom was a speaker at the movie night, and I just was at my mom's house to support her. And that's how I kind of fell into becoming a part of this committee. So when I get to do my grandmother's story, I show my students pictures of her as I knew her. And so it gives them a more personal kind of connection to me and my life and my family. And like Dave and Paula, when I listened to them speak, I could feel those emotions that they were feeling. And I teach 5 sections of ELA. So when I give her story, my first class of the day, I'm always like on the verge of tears, because seeing my grandmother's pictures, of course, makes me smile. But to think about what she's been through also lays heavily on my mind. So I show them my life and how I knew her, because like my 8th graders that you saw in the video, I grew up not knowing much about the Holocaust, and I didn't even know my grandmother was a survivor until after she had passed away, because she never talked about it. She never wanted to talk about it. So I really go through and I just kind of show them images and pictures. I'm lucky that I have documentation. I kind of refresh their brains about things they learn in social studies and that we talk about. I embed video into presentations for kids. And I really just kind of, again, go through the historical progression of events until I get to the SS St. Louis. So I just kind of go through everything that's happening. And then I get to the St. Louis and I talk about my family and I show them these pictures of them, you know, outside, because it was a luxury cruise liner. It was like they were going on a cruise. They were going to celebrate this new life in Cuba, right? And, you know, and so I show these images of my family, which helps build that story. And then I show images of them being on the St. Louis and birthday parties and fine dining and all of these things. And my great grandfather was the rabbi on the ship. And my grandmother was only 5 when she was on it. So, you know, all of these things really help draw my students into the story. And I finally get to kind of the end of what happens with the St. Louis and how they're sent back and what happens to my grandmother and her parents and how they were taken in by a woman in France just out of her good graces. She didn't even know them, and she hid them until the Nazis invaded France, and then they were able to get refuge in Switzerland, which is a whole story. But then I show them images of her in France and Switzerland going to school, and displaced person camps and things of that nature. And a lot of my grandmother's story, the Holocaust Museum helped unfold a lot of it because they had translators that could translate a lot of the German documentation. And I talk about what their life was like when they first came here to the United States and how they really had to start from the beginning. And then I show them pictures of my grandparents and my mom young, when she's a baby. And then Tanta Carola did come to the United States a few times to visit my family and to see them. So this personal story all gets built up by what I do in my classroom. And I'm sorry I'm not in present mode, just because I'm going to go through quite a few tabs. So it's going to be easier than going in and out of the presentation. But in my class, I teach 8th grade ELA. So I start with The Boy Who Dared by Susan Campbell Bartoletti. And it's a true account of the youngest gentleman that was killed. He was beheaded. He was executed by the Nazis for telling the truth. And it's a really compelling story. 8th graders are very drawn to it, this idea that one person can change the world type of thing. And so they really do enjoy this text. And the great thing about introducing this text when I brought it in my curriculum, it gives all that backstory about how Hitler rose to power and the propaganda of the Nazis and how people were really afraid of what was going on. And he instilled that fear, and how rights were taken away. And so with the gravitational pull of everything, how that civic engagement of the people just sort of went away. They just kind of did what they were told and what they had to do to survive. And so this is a really great text. I then push into the Diary of Anne Frank, and we do the play version. It's a classic piece, and I like that this is a story about a young gentleman, and this is who probably would have made it through the war and survived, but chose to speak out, chose to be somebody that spoke out against the Nazis, and then a person who's persecuted by the Nazis. So we have a gentleman's story and a young girl's story. And I think that's important to put those parallels next to each other. I incorporate different short stories every year. So you can always incorporate short stories that might exist in your curriculum. Of course, I use my grandmother's story. It is probably the most compelling thing. And I used to have my mom come in and give the story, and then I kind of took it over, and I started to give it. My social studies counterpart is invaluable to me. I can't tell you that, because when she starts talking about World War II, I start talking about the Holocaust. So us working together certainly helps the understanding and the nature of what students are trying to learn. And I think it really helps them kind of embed it in their brain a little bit more. I do show a documentary. It's called Paper Clips. It is a little dated at this moment in time, but the value of this movie is it talks about a rural community in Tennessee who has no diversity, and pretty much everybody's Christian. And so it opens up this diversity chapter for them, and they collect paper clips to represent the 6 million Jews that are killed during the Holocaust, but they end up collecting so many more paper clips than that. But it shows them the power of what middle school kids can really do and how they can create change. And then there's survivors' testimonies in there. There's ally soldiers who liberated. And it just really, last year was the first year I had students that got emotional watching paper clips, that they cried, especially when the liberators were giving their stories. So just a really powerful movie that shows young people making a difference. Of course, the FDR Library is always a great source, and then the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and you'll hear a presentation from them later. So two members of our team created a resource list for you, and it will be available on the website. I think this presentation might end up being available for you too, and I put hyperlinks in here. I know that we sometimes get so many resources that we're bombarded by them. And so I just tried to highlight a few key things that are going on each website for you to kind of help narrow it down. So this is the Anti-Defamation League. And one resource that on here that I was really excited about, my husband's like, don't talk about it because like you're excited about it. It's bad. It's anti-Semitism. Don't be excited about it. But I was excited about it because our students really don't think that it still exists. You know, here in Poughkeepsie, New York, there was a house that had a Nazi flag hanging out of it at one point in time last year. So, you know, it's still very real, but it has their mission and everything here, and they have so many other things that they're doing. But the one resource out here that I really like, it's a tracker for anti-Semitism. And so you can actually put in your state and it'll give you instances, dates, so very current information. So your students can see that it's still very relevant. It's still very true. It's still happening out there. And you can narrow it down to the state so they can see, you know, it's not so far away. So I really like that resource. Another resource that was out here is Facing History Ourselves, and I was actually in Abby's presentation too. And they have all of these websites have resources for teachers that you can kind of access and get through. But again, I'm just highlighting the ones that I thought that were different and kind of stood out for me. And so this is Facing History and Ourselves, and Abby had out there on hers the roots and impact of anti-Semitism. A lot of students don't understand, how did this start? Why was it the Jews that were targeted in particular? So it gives a lot of background and information on that website, which I thought was very helpful. The next one is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And Jody, during one of the breaks, was talking about this idea of Holocaust denial. And it's so crazy to think that people could deny that something like this happened in the world, but they do exist. I've met them. And so I like that they have specifically on this website something that you can use in your classroom to address that idea of Holocaust denial. And what do you do when students ask you those specific questions? You know, is this real? Is this true? It is. It's very real. It's very true. So I like that that's out there. I'm sorry that I'm going quick. I promised that I wasn't going to take all the lunch break. For you folks in New Jersey, and even if you're not in New Jersey, what I really liked about the New Jersey Commission of Holocaust Education is that they broke down a curriculum guided materials by grade level. So if you're a person that you have higher achieving middle school students like I do, like an honors class or something, you want to push them, you want to challenge them, then you can bump into like more ninth grade resources. And if you're somebody who's just kind of starting, you're in the seventh grade realm and you want to be, you know, kind of easy and handle it with kid gloves, you can bump down grade levels for yourself too. And this website has so many other resources on it too. Some of them are the same that I'm going to talk about, but there's so many links and resources out there, which is so awesome. And it looks like this. So I really like that they break everything down and then all the resources are here for you to tap into, which is nice. It's so cool. I like the Holocaust Human Rights Education Center because what they have for you here, especially, you have to talk about propaganda. We have to discuss it, right, on some level. And they have an exhibit here that you can ask for access to that I think would go really nice with propaganda for those of you that want to focus on that. But they also have book lists. So they have a young readers book list that you can tap into for ages 4 to 18. And then they have, if you're going to go beyond just teaching the Holocaust and you're going into human rights and other more current day issues, which again, all of these resources have ways to tie it into current day issues of today, you can tap into other books there. So for my ELA fans out there, this is really great. I love that these book lists are out there. We've created one too, but this one, you know, it's just nice to see. They have so many things on it, so check it out. Penn State is a little bit ahead of New York State here in the idea that they're pushing out and they're giving resources directly from Penn State to their educators. The cool thing that was here is they have a documentary. It's called A Wing and a Prayer. And it focuses on how there was a potential invasion of Israel. And so there was a top secret illegal mission carried out by Jewish and non-Jewish American aviators to kind of stop a second Holocaust. So if you want to continue the talk, and if you have students that say this would never happen again, well, it almost did. So there's something that you can use there for that. The Showa Foundation, there's so much on this website, and it's all based on using testimony to tell the story. So it's a lot of what 3GNY does and other places. And this is kind of funded and run in some part by Steven Spielberg. It was his mission to kind of continue after he did Schindler's List. But the eyewitness teachings. It has over 3,500 testimonies that are out here. And it's not just Holocaust testimonies, but kind of testimonies of injustice that you can see and that you can access and show right in your class. So genocide denial, education, this idea of hate, right? George Floyd and prejudice, just so many resources that are out here and available for you guys that are just great and accessible. Yad Vashem, of course, we could not leave without talking about them. And they have the echoes and reflections on here, which you'll hear more about, the idea of testimony and things of that nature. But I do like, especially when I was teaching remotely, when we first went home for COVID, my Holocaust education, because there was so much happening in the world, I tried to focus on the good things that people did during the Holocaust. And so I really focused on the righteous of the nation. And what I really like about this is that it shows that one person or a small group of people can make a huge difference in the world. And you can actually show them on here by country how many people have changed things or how many people have created action. So when they're like, well, why didn't more people stand out? Why didn't more people do something? And you can kind of show in numbers people who are trying to make a difference, and it gives you a total. So some kids just need a tangible total number on there, and I really like that. And the last resource is, of course, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. There's so much on here, and you'll get a presentation from them later. But one exhibit that I really found helpful and useful, especially for people who teach American history or introducing this for the first time, or you get students to ask about, why didn't America do more? Didn't we know things? What did we know? What didn't we know? The Holocaust Museum has an exhibit on their website that in 45 minutes, it'll take you through the entire exhibition and give you the tour of it with the explanation by the curator. And it's totally doable within a period, within a class period. And you can do this as young as the age of 11. And I watched it actually over the summer. I took part in the Belfer conference with the Holocaust Museum, which is completely free if you're interested in it. And it was great. It was great. Totally worth the time. And like Jeff said before, if you have a good website you use, a novel, short story, book, or a witness account that you use that you think students or teachers would benefit from, please send it our way. I added Jeff's email in there after the last time he spoke so that you can all just send it directly to him, and we will make sure it gets uploaded onto the website for everybody to be able to use. And of course, if you have any questions or anything, please just let us know. That's it for me. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you, Laura. What would you like? So you've been doing this for 14 years, you say, right? And what would you say is like the biggest misconception that students have about the Holocaust? You know, I mean, it just seems like from the film we saw earlier, you know, it's kind of all over the place. But if you had to summarize it up, like what are kids thinking about this nowadays?
I have to say the majority of nowadays is kids are like, haven't even heard of it. My first time that I ever had students that said, I've never been taught this, I don't know I'd never even heard that word, was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And that shocked me. Like they didn't even know what the term was. So it's, even though my students at the beginning, and you know, we had 25 kids that interviewed, but everybody can't make the cut, unfortunately. Some kids knew a lot, and some kids just really know it was something bad that happened to Jewish people. So I think that there are misconceptions, but mostly it's just, we don't know because there isn't time built in the curriculum to teach them when they are younger, which is why I like so much on the Human Rights website that they have those resources for 4 to 18. That's so great for a way to kind of tap in and teach those younger generations, those young kids, a little bit of something. So by the time they get to the high school, it all kind of comes full circle.
Right, that's really important. You know, one of the things we're trying to do is to get folks to understand that you just don't go through a curriculum, hit week 27, oh, Holocaust, you know, do your 40 minutes, check the box and move on. You know, this stuff really needs to be talked about when kids are little. You know, that's where to me, I see that kids really understand a lot of these concepts when they're little. You know, they understand fairness, they understand bullying, they understand, you know, injustice. You know, you've got to go to bed early. How come? Because I said so, you know, those sorts of things. And if we can get them young, we can begin to make that little transition to, okay, here's what's happening in your world. And then, you can kind of make that connection as you get older. One of the other things I thought was really interesting, you talked about how you've got your partnership with your social studies person. And I happen to know who that is, and she is awesome. So this is really a cross curriculum, kind of a venture. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, honestly, the first year that I started in my building, and she didn't really know much about me. I didn't really know much about her. So that first year, every year we fine tune it and we make it even more. But without her, I help her because, especially teaching The Boy Who Dared, I can kind of go through those things that are happening in Europe that the kids don't get because they're studying American history. So for me, by teaching texts like The Boy Who Dared and The Diary of Anne Frank, I can talk about more of a European aspect that they don't get till 10th grade. And it kind of helps them understand the American aspect. And I mean, they still always have the question, why didn't America get involved sooner? Why did we wait till the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, pretty much, because in an 8th grade mindset, it's that simple. We should have done more. We knew more. So I think the benefit of my co-teacher and I is, one, we've been working together for 8 years now, so it makes a huge difference. But I can be on one side of a perspective and she's on the other side of the perspective, and somewhere in the middle those perspectives meet, and that we're helping each other help those kids fully conceptualize the ideas.
Great. We've got a question in the chat. With so many terrible events in history, how do you justify teaching about the Holocaust while not covering other genocides?
Well, I was going to say too, almost every single one of those websites, if not every single one of them, because they all kind of mesh in my brain now, all of them pretty much have a way to acknowledge genocides or injustice that are happening today, like especially facing history ourselves. They have a lot of things on there. Same thing with the ADL. They have a lot of things on there because they realize that teaching the Holocaust is one piece to talking about and discussing genocide for other things. So, and in the eyewitness on the Showa Foundation's website, a lot of those eyewitnesses, they have them where it's a Holocaust survivor and they're talking parallel to like somebody from Rwanda and the genocide and the violence that was faced there. So I think a lot of people in today's world are seeing that the Holocaust is a precursor to other things that are still happening and still going on. Like Dave mentioned from one of the students that he spoke with, it's still very, very real. And the idea and the concept of refugees and things of that nature, I think it's all relevant in today's society.
Yeah, I think it also ties in, and I know I sound like a broken record, and you're all old enough to know what that means. If you say that to a kid today, they don't know what you're talking about, a broken record. But I don't want to sound like a broken record, but this all still comes back to this idea of critical thinking. So if, what happened with the Holocaust, this scapegoating, the othering of them, the step-by-step progression to take away their rights, to take away their citizenship, to take away their humanity. These are the same kinds of things that happen in other genocides as well. So this concept of critical thinking, if we can get kids to understand this sort of stuff as it results to the Holocaust, then it becomes relatively easy for them to take those skills, to take that knowledge, to take that content and apply it to other situations, whether in history or in the current day. And we have a comment here in the chat. I agree with Laura, as do I. My seniors who were about to graduate were shocked by the details. They knew it, like Laura said, as something bad that happened a while ago. A student said the other day, I kind of feel like the education system has failed us because I didn't really know this. I was happy to hear my son's school, they are studying the Holocaust this year in 5th grade. And I think that's great. And yeah, the sooner you can get to this stuff, the sooner it makes sense and can be incorporated in the other, the other aspects of education. And then in line with that, Tiffany mentions there are efforts in schools to include any content earlier, such as 5th grade. My son read the series Once, Then, Now by Morris Goldsman, which was age appropriate. Yeah, it's not always easy to find age-appropriate material for students, but it is important to look for that, and hopefully we're going to generate some resources for that, so we can begin to to get kids interested in this and knowing a little bit about this. Again, it's never too early to start this. One of the hassles I had when I taught was, kids say, I hate history. I don't understand history. History makes no sense. And one day I pulled a kid aside and I said, well, you like movies? And, oh yeah, I love movies. So what's a recent movie you saw? And I'm just going to use Star Wars as an example. And so tell me about the movie. So, oh, well, there's this, this planet, and there's these good guys and these bad guys, and there's just Darth Vader and this and that. And the kid told me the entire story. And I said, well, you know what? That's exactly what history is. History has a plot. It has good guys. It has bad guys. And we have to be careful how we do that, because we're supposed to be subjective. When you're talking about Hitler, I think you're on very firm ground saying bad guy. But if you look at the plot, the subplots, the settings, the undercurrents and things like that, if you could understand that in a movie, you can certainly understand that in the context of history. But as Jonah said earlier, we can't just present this stuff as dates and facts and figures and that sort of stuff. We need to give it the flesh and blood. It's not just the bones of history, it's the flesh and blood. It has to be the ability for folks to, to get the story and to see how it impacted people's lives and such.
So there's a comment and / question in there, does the concept of God come up in your classroom, and does it present a challenge? For some of the websites too, for people who teach primarily in a Jewish setting, there are specific things for you. But for me, I have to say, generally, they know that they're being persecuted because of their religion. And if any type of religious or God-based questions come up, I just try and keep it very historical and factual, because you can't deny the facts and you cannot deny what a religion says that their guidelines are. And so I think as long as you keep it just very much in line with, this is what this faith believes, and this is the standards or the foundations of how this religion was created, students get that and they understand that. And so when we first start teaching the Holocaust, we go through and we talk about anti-Semitism, and we really talk about those things that kind of created them to be stereotypes and created them to be pointed at or to be othered. I like that term today that people used. So in 8th graders get it. They get that, because adolescents are the biggest stereotype group in the world. You see a group of them together, you automatically assume they're all doing something bad, right? So they get it, and they feel like they're constantly being judged, and that people are thinking things about them. So I've never have had to go into big theological discussions about it. I just very matter-of-factly say, this is the basics of what people who practice Judaism believe. And here's how it differs from, Christianity. And there are so many different things. When they make it to 10th grade, they get taught all those religions. So I just try and do it in a very basic kid glove type of manner,
Next question is from Judith. I happen to know that Judith, a very good friend of mine. How are you, Judy? Do you ever find that parents oppose this being taught?
I haven't met one yet, but that doesn't mean that I won't, because I'm only about halfway through my teaching career, but I haven't yet. And I've only, I've always had supportive parents. I've had students that have kind of tried to combat me because they can't believe that something so terrible has happened. But when you show them the facts are the facts. But I'm very lucky, haven't had any parents, but again, it's in the curriculum, it's in the guidelines, not just in 8th grade world, but throughout high school too. So, we're kind of luckily backed by New York State education law and our Board of Education. So that's good.
That's a very interesting question, Judy, because one of the things that I find with what we do, and Laura's experience is a little bit different. I do education programs all over the country, all over the world. And one of the things that's very interesting is that there are places in this country where things that you and I might think are just simple facts or simple things that could be talked about or should be talked about are taboo in certain places and in certain parts of the country. I've been on this national committee for creating civics for the National Archives and Records Administration, and one of the things that we discovered was, there are certain trigger words and certain things where you had to be kind of careful because they've gotten to the point now where they can attract electricity and lightning for some of these things. And in some places in the country, see what's going on with school boards. School boards are being, challenged by parents about, teaching certain things in the curriculum or not teaching certain things in the curriculum. And it's really become very politicized. And one of the things that we believe is going to be happening, hopefully through this conference and through some of the other work that the organizations are doing, is that when you bring this stuff into the classroom as the Roosevelt Presidential Library or the National Archives or Echoes and Reflection or 3G New York, you're bringing in these organizations that are knowing what they're talking about. They've got the facts, they've got the documentation, they've got the credibility. Things have been vetted, things have been discussed and debated. When we put up any exhibit in this museum, there's committees that go back and forth about what should be included, what shouldn't be included, why isn't this being included, how is that being included. So there really is a lot of dynamics that go into this, and different places in the country. I know I'm not going to mention the state, but there's one state that I have a teacher friend in, and she was saying that teachers are quitting. They're leaving the teaching profession because it's become so difficult to teach certain topics, because you get all kinds of flack from the outside and such. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do here. Again, is create this community, this this place that will allow us to get the facts, get the documents, and get some ideas about how other people are experiencing this stuff around the country.
Yeah, it's a dicey time. As somebody said in a faculty meeting yesterday, it's a dicey time to be a teacher, right? There's so many things. And I think as long as you're as easy as possible, but you're sticking to the facts, because the facts are the facts and history is history and numbers are numbers. And all of those websites have all of the facts and documents on top of Abby and the things you're going to see later in today. If you're just keeping things as factual as possible, I think everything will be okay.
And you can look at it in an odd way. Being in the business for so long and everything, Jonah had mentioned earlier about, he felt that there's hope, that he felt hopeful from this. And that's the way I feel, because in some ways, my grandmother used to say, if you want to make an omelet, you got to crack some eggs. And the idea of that is that, some of the stuff is going to get messier before it gets better. But it's the fact that we're beginning to talk about this stuff, the fact that we're beginning to have other voices come in, other perspectives, it goes back to this idea of civility. We can agree or we can disagree, but we have to disagree respectfully. I can attack your facts, but I can't attack you as a person. I can attack, your methodology, the resource you're using, the research methods that you used. But as Laura said, you get to a certain point where the fact is the fact. And I'm very hopeful of that, because as you look through, as bad as things are out there right now, things have been bad in the past. Each generation has faced their own, crisis, their own, issues. And when you hear about these stories of the survivors, passing this information on to their children and their grandchildren, and you begin to see what these folks went through, you begin to realize we don't have it so bad, and that there is hope. And as long as there's organizations such as the ones we're working with here today and creating this community, the words are going to get out there. The information is going to be made available. And that always lifts my spirit as well. Let's see, we got some folks in here.
Jeffrey, one of the things that has not come up as a content tool, and it's an interesting alternate medium. In the 30s, and for a long time in history, comic strips have often captured the culture and the times and the psychic trauma that's going on. And one of the classics is Superman. And this was developed by some European Jews who were in some respects fighting anti-Semitism and what was the rise of Hitler and Nazism through a character, somewhat Messiah-like character, Superman. And I suspect there are other comics as well. And we heard from Josh Aronson at the beginning with the Orchestra of Exiles, and there was an example of dealing with the horrors of the Holocaust through music and fighting back through music. And I think you're planning something in that regard. So I don't know we can talk about it right now, but I would be curious if Laura or others have started to use alternative tools like comics that captured what was going on at the time, and if they have any potential to maybe interest students a little bit differently than some of this historical factual stuff.
There are graphic novels. So Dave mentioned The Devil's Arithmetic earlier that hit somebody had read it in 7th grade. And in our district, we had taught that at one moment in time too. So there's graphic novels and cartoons. Of course, social studies focuses on political cartoons and propaganda and everything. So yeah, there are definitely other mediums. There are obviously virtual witness testimonies that you can see, and there is actually a resource out there where you can ask a survivor a question and it'll respond to you in real time. So you can have your students ask it a question and it'll respond to you. So I assume it's like a database of the most frequently asked questions to Holocaust survivors. And so as students ask them, this hologram or this virtual avatar will respond directly to you. So yeah, there's all different types of mediums. For me, mainly, I just use like research databases or, like Yad Vashem for the righteous of the nation and things like that, and just resources I've had electronically to reach my students in a virtual and remote environment. But there's so many things out there now that museums are offering and things like that. Penn State has all these COVID resources for teachers. So now is the time, if you're going to get electronic resources, it's probably the best thing that's come out of COVID for teachers at this time. So
yeah, sometimes we discover the best things by accident. Hey, Jonah, I'm gonna one up you on the Superman. March 1941, Captain America makes his debut as a result of the attack at Pearl Harbor, and he is on the front cover of the comic book with this big shield, and the folks that are coming at him are, of course, the folks in the Axis. Yeah, absolutely, and I believe they were 2 Jewish cartoonists who came up with that. So.
Yeah. Maybe the FDR could do a whole exhibit one day on cartoons.
Okay, I'm shouting in here now. For those of you who do follow what Jewish Federation is, we just did our movie night in on Will Eisner, who is a graphic novelist, otherwise known as a cartoonist, who was an entrepreneur. But if you look at his stuff, and if you haven't had a chance to watch that documentary, we will be posting the dialogue we had with Bradley Duguid because that is his area of specialty. But there were a lot of different morals and different stories. So yeah, if you didn't see that movie, you can still get it at the library and watch the links. But yeah, Will Eisner was one of the very, very well-known cartoonists or graphic artists or sequential artists, as when one can call whatever it is nowadays.
Wow.
You've done so many great movies at the Federation, Karen. They've been great.
Absolutely.
We've done a lot with FDR as well.
Yes.
Well,
I meant that, yes.
The more ways you get the information out there, in teacher biz, as these teachers know, there are what we call multiple modalities. Some kids are visual learners, some kids are auditory learners, they're tactile learners. The more modalities, the more ways you get this message out there, the more folks you're going to connect with. And the more these messages begin to overlap and reinforce each other, the stronger that learning becomes, because now the information has been corroborated from various sources and such. We have another question here. Would kids ever be taken on field trips to the Holocaust Museum? I know that happens a lot in the Washington, D.C. area, in Virginia and those kinds of places. The kids come in for that. It might be a bit of a trek, but Laura, you take your kids to Washington and you go to the Holocaust Museum there, right?
Yeah, it's part of the 8th grade trip. the teacher that organizes the 8th grade trip, but this will be another year we're not doing it because of COVID, but hopefully next year it'll be back. But it's life-changing for them to be in a place and to just feel silence, to feel the silence. It's amazing. But if you're in New York State or nearby New York State, in Battery Park, there's a Holocaust Museum. So there are local resources. And a lot of states have local Holocaust resource centers too. So like Long Island has one, up by Buffalo, there's one. Across the country, states have resources. And when Christina comes on from the United States Holocaust Museum, that's actually what she does. She's the liaison between that and all of the Holocaust resource centers that exist across the country. So, she'd be a great person to kind of tap into. But I'm sure there is somewhere on the Holocaust Museum's website, you can find a local resource center for yourself where they can help you organize a field trip or come and see you and bring, primary documents or something right to your room so kids have a visual, tangible something to witness.